Chashahalt Pesia, Cameron Decker, Louis Squest, Chin Cool Whil, Whilwilt, Tilskalk, Uchisk Eliuch, Chinnis Lemti, Whil, Yithwasket. Good day, everybody. My name is Cameron Decker, and I make things for Whilwilt LLC, Salish for Alive and Well. I am from Arlee, and I'm grateful for today. Grateful to get to present to you about a topic that's important to me and my family and to our culture. The title of this presentation is ástqʷ, Salish Cedar Bark Baskets and the Life of a Tree. In this presentation, we'll think about ways to incorporate Salish and Indigenous culture into the classroom. I hope at the end of it that you feel inspired, that you collaborate with artists, art teachers in your classroom, or even your own inner artist, or the little artists that are all in your classroom. And I hope that you feel like you can reach out and use the resources that I'll present to you here at the end. When I was putting this together, and a lot of this inspiration for this project is thinking about those who are unsure of how to teach Native American culture, unsure or are uncomfortable with how to implement or teach Native American culture, or maybe how to connect with your course material and connecting that with Native American culture is a challenge. It's something I've heard over and over again on our reservation in speaking with teachers. I designed this presentation based off of a lot of things that I've heard as in my time in education on our reservation, and especially from teachers in lots of trainings and things that I've attended or presented at, and that those barriers can come from a whole bunch of different reasons. It could be lack of access to materials, or being able to decipher like what's appropriate and inappropriate, finding resources like meaningful, valuable resources, or connection to a tribal knowledge keeper, to know someone to be able to lean on for questions, and or maybe for those that do not know some of the CSKT history, values, and contributions. When I hear about these barriers to incorporating Indigenous education into the classroom, I always refer teachers back to the OPI website and the essential understandings regarding Montana Indians. This presentation covers and highlights at least two of the essential understandings, numbers 3 and 6. And I'll read to you number 3. The ideologies of Native American traditional beliefs and spirituality persist into modern day life as tribal cultures, traditions, and languages are still practiced by many American Indian people and are incorporated into how tribes govern and manage their affairs. Additionally, each tribe has its own oral histories, which are as valid as written histories. These histories predate the discovery of North America. And number 6, history is a story most often related through the subjective experience of the teller. With the inclusion of more and varied voices, histories are being rediscovered and revised. History told from American Indian perspectives frequently conflicts with the stories mainstream historians tell. I am Dene, a proud member of the Navajo Nation. I am a member of the Many Houses clan. My grandmother, May Knoll, is a fluent speaker of our language. My grandfather, Gerald Knoll, was a member of Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Both of them worked on our reservation at Job Corps and taught countless students how to cook and how to be mechanics and how to lead a productive, successful life depending on their own skills. Many of those values that they passed on to me, my brother, and my cousins. I think about them when I'm doing this work. They were both strong advocates for tribal education, and they did it through practice, through engagement with their students. They taught so much more than just their subjects. Sure, they taught cooking, and they taught mechanics, and they taught them very well. But what they were teaching everybody was really about life, something only amazing grandparents can do. I aspire to be a teacher like them, ones who can make such a lasting impact on people's lives and to make them believe in themselves that they can achieve. So, in recognizing the inspirations for this work, I just have to say to my grandparents, Lam Lam ástqʷ, for all of the things that they did for us to make sure that we were raised to know our identity and to know who we are and where we came from, and the things that we need to fight for to continue on what they learned from their ancestors. And I'm just so grateful to have such a strong family. I couldn't do this work without my better half, my spouse, my wife, my partner, Aspen Decker. She is the muse for so much of this work that we do, just based on her cultural knowledge and her abilities in Salish language. Uh, she's a wealth of sort of knowledge about things around us, and based on learning from her elders, and is really just from here, and knows so much. So I feel right along with the kids, we learn together from Aspen and get to sort of take part in all of these different projects. We get to learn and practice what we're learning in a way that I think would make all of our ancestors really proud. And she's at the heart of that. So we're just really chinas lemti for all the work that she does, and sort of for allowing me to collaborate with her with the ways that I think about art and contemporary times. And I'm so grateful that our skills are so complementary, and it's exciting to be able to put material like this together. It's really impossible without her. So I just wanted to recognize her in this. I graduated from the University of New Mexico with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Art History in 2010. It was there that I got to learn not only courses in art history, but studio practices in drawing and ceramics that have really influenced a lot of the work that I do today. Those were the two sparks that made me realize that I wanted to pursue art as a passion and as a career and as a direction in life. And later got my master's degree from the University of Montana in fine arts, in integrated arts and education through the Creative Pulse program. This program I was so grateful for because I was able to take it during the summer, and I was able to continue working. I was working at SKC at the time. Our project with the Montana Arts Council is the inspiration for this presentation. I'm going to break it into 3 parts, and I'm going to show you some of our inspirations, the way we think about place, and how we use our knowledge from nature and connect it with art making practice that informs all of the work that we do. I'm going to show you some of the ways that I think you can integrate Salish reverence for cedar bark trees and its uses by indigenous peoples into the classroom, and learning about scientific terminology around trees and explanations for the life cycles of trees and how they work and how they operate. Bringing those two things together into a cohesive unit that I think teachers can take advantage of on our reservation in particular.
So with this bark, we end up bending it in half, and then you stitch it up. And then we got to get some willow, and then the willow goes around the top part of it, so it holds it open when it dries like that. And we're able to gather stuff and put it in there. And this ástqʷ, it's like a bug repellent, so it keeps bugs and rodents away from our food, so it's able to store all winter.
We see the traditional cedar bark basket as an object that contains rich opportunity for educating Montana students. One of the projects we developed lets students make replicas of cedar bark baskets using clay. We created over 200 clay cedar bark basket replicas with elementary students in Kalispell. This is some video footage of how I created the molds to create our clay cedar bark basket replicas. Students assembled this replica Salish cedar bark basket made of clay, and we focused on slab building techniques, textures, and press molds, as well as the form of traditional Salish baskets that were used in the area for millennia. students got to focus on the clay building process and learn about this important Salish vessel, as well as Salish language associated with cedar bark and the basket itself. And so here you can see this again, this great and beautiful texture of the cedar bark. It's what inspired me to again use the sort of memory qualities of clay to press on and capture its texture. Cedar bark is removed from the tree. It uses 2 layers that are replenished year over year, but you have to peel off the bark in a very particular way, and can only take a very certain amount in order to not damage or harm the tree permanently. And it's what's known as scarring the tree. And so it was some of the properties of clay that I really started to think about in how more abundant it is, how much more accessible it is, and how I could capture some of the same texture qualities of bark, as well as using the slab building technique to replicate the actions of folding bark and sewing it up and creating a functional vessel. So this is me peeling the clay off of the cedar bark scrap that we had left over, and it's funny to watch because it's really similar to the way you peel it off of the tree. And so here I am sort of replicating the process with a different material. In the resources later, I'll show you sources of sort of how I came up with this idea, inspired by Corky Claremont and his glass cedar basket. How can we use this alternative material to create a historical, traditional form that's appropriate and authentic and sustainable, as well as accessible for all students? To me, clay was that solution. It's abundant and relatively inexpensive, and is always students always just have a blast using it. It's always kind of a mess. It's really heavy. It's fragile and difficult to work with, but somehow it's still the most fun art form to do, I think. And so this is again the process of constructing a mold out of plaster. And so here you can see my coddles. They're just basically little boxes without tops and bottoms that I seal to my plastic table. And this is preparing for this. I've pressed out my slab onto the cedar bark, and I press the coddle over it, much like kind of like a cookie cutter, and seal it into place. And so this gives me a nice long sort of rectangular plaster mold to use. I've sort of already considered how long of a slab I need and what the size of the finished product will look like. These aren't really building baskets that are as big as they can be, but it's really, again, sort of something to be able to peel off of a mold, to fold with the same sort of action, and to seal it up and create it and let it dry into a form that, again, can contain things and things that you could gather up and place in it. So it's really inspired by the process. I don't know if I could have came up with this had I not gone through the process. Here, this is always fun. My kids really enjoyed watching this part of the process, and we're just amazed at the chemical sort of properties and change of plaster, that it went from sort of a liquid to a solid right before their eyes. I always say art is the true magic, and here you get to see it. The process that we've taken here to go from gathering the bark to using it, to pressing it out with the clay, to sealing the clay into its coddle, and casting it into this final plaster form makes for a really satisfying process. It's a lot of hard work, but it's also really interesting to see how you copy the world around us, and how we work with space and texture, how we capture the world around us in this way, maybe different from the way you might capture the world with a photograph or even a painting. This is sort of physical copy, and now you have this functional brick of texture for cedar bark to use. I've been experimenting a lot with the same type of rubber you use for making rubber stamps and creating something that's even more, well, especially a lot lighter, and something that's maybe even a little more versatile, something that could be used not only to press into clay, but maybe to run through a printing press and capture texture, even through just printing by hand if you don't have access to a printing press. The opportunities there to get into other mixed media, which leads me into the next project to show you how I've started to work with the cedar bark basket form. Here I'll show you a short clip of Aspen teaching a few of the Salish words that we wanted to show to students as they learn this process.
Okay.
What's one Salish word that these children should know?
ástqʷ. ástqʷ means cedar, red cedar. It's like Austin type of thing, but ástqʷ. ástqʷ. The other word you guys can know is how to give thanks to these trees and these things that we gather. You say "Ka'eslamti," we are grateful. Ka'eslamti. Or you could use the I am grateful, and that's like a chin for I. Chin. Chineslamti. Chineslamti chod ástqʷ. I'm grateful for the ástqʷ. Chineslamti chod ástqʷ. This is the sign language for I. Indian Sign Language. I. Chin. Chineslamti. This is you're grateful. Your hand goes up. Chineslamti chod ástqʷ.
So here's another way I've sort of experimented with the basket form, using alternative materials to actual cedar bark. I'm still sort of fascinated by the texture and find myself constantly sort of trying to capture it. And in this process, I used what's called a jelly plate. It's a type of like silicone or some kind of, maybe it's just some kind of rubber that has mineral oils in it that don't allow paint to actually hold on to it and stick to it. So you can put acrylic paint down on the jelly plate, and it's got a little bit of a bounce to it. It's sort of elastic and rubbery, so you can press down on it and get a good press. And I just sort of instantly feel like an artist working with these. And the chance that I got to work with kids at a workshop this summer in Arlee, we were able to use them and had a great time. We produced a lot of prints because the process is so accessible. Here's a couple more examples of baskets that I made with, again, students in Arlee during a workshop this summer at the Arlee CDC. It was really fun to make these. I wanted to push the students to be even sort of more expressive and to sort of develop their own bark. Looking at like opportunities on how they can put even more expression into this by maybe creating images on the baskets and kind of following along with the theme of gathering, or sustaining or feeding ourselves, or the things we collect. What are those prompts that can sort of emerge from this basket making process that will resonate with students and allow them to open up a little bit. Again, I really like the approach to sort of integrating printmaking into teaching. Printmaking sort of instantly makes you feel like an artist, and the ways that you can use all kinds of different materials and create your own textures sort of creatively is just something that makes it really fun. And again, we get to sort of feel like an artist, and that's always really exciting. So these are on display through I believe into October at the Arlee CDC, and I hope to be able to keep pushing this project for students, and hopefully something I can come to schools with to make. finally, I'll end with the resources that I've come across that I think are valuable and that you could also use to inspire some of your own connections in the way that you would bring this into the classroom. I can't really tell you how. I can only just help try to push and inspire from what I know. And so I have come across resources that I think you will find valuable and can use to supplement or to support this work. All right, everybody. I want to walk through a list of resources that I think could be useful to you in your classroom. When I am looking to be inspired in art lately, I really turn to science. Science is so fascinating in the way that it puts into words sometimes what I'm observing maybe in nature, but just don't know how to put into words, or that when I'm reading through things about my local ecology and the environment around me, I'll notice things that I didn't before. And I find that to be really similar to art in the way that I look at art in an inquiry-based method. I work for the Missoula Art Museum, and I'm an educator and outreach coordinator there. And part of my job is to create inquiry-based questions and guides to our art exhibitions. And I found that when I've applied some of the very same principles of asking, like, what do I notice? What do I wonder? To my time out in nature, and asking my kids those same questions, that when we come back, we notice and we remember, and we have memories about a place, a time, a word that we learned. We are able to engage with the environment around us in a way that is driven by our minds and our experience and our observations. And they're so similar, art and science, in their values. And so so I found just various resources here that I think bring those two things together. I've listed them in the description of this video with links, but for here, I'll go through them and we can sort of follow along together. Again, these are just ones I've come across as a teacher, oh my gosh, got flies in here. These are just ones that I've come across in my time as a teacher, in my time reading about art. I also was part of a project illustrating a book about Flathead Lake and invasive mussel species and in Salish language, called ástqʷ, Journey to the Lake, by Georgia Smize. And I illustrated it, and my wife Aspen Decker translated it into Salish. I've also linked that. I'll link that in the description too, and I'll add it here as a tab that we can look through. But for now, I'm going to go through these just sort of one by one and point out some of the things that I've noticed. For one of the most fascinating things that's really stuck out to me about the properties of cedar bark and cedar wood in general is that it repels bugs. It doesn't have bugs the same way that other trees do. And so to learn here about tannins and this compound that is the particular reason why bugs are not, they're repelled by the bark and by the cedar itself, is because of the tannins. I'm not a scientist, but tannins are found commonly in the bark of trees, wood, leaves, buds, stems, fruit seeds, roots, and plant galls. In all of these plant structures, tannins help to protect the individual plant species. Tannins that become stored in the bark of trees protect the tree from being infected by bacteria or fungi. And so here we get a chance to learn about this thing that is also in coffee, tea, red wine, and beer. Fruits also, something that many of us have consumed. This site here, I think, is just really useful. This U.S. Forest Service. I found a lot of inspiration from this page, looking at things like plant of the week, pollinator of the month. As we go and we look at and observe different flowers growing around around the reservation and off the reservation, on sort of Aboriginal Salish territories. As I learn more about native plants, I feel like there's some sort of like celebrity when I see them out in nature, and to be sort of in awe of them when I learn about the plants that have been here for thousands and thousands of years, and then especially in the ways that my ancestors and our people and indigenous people have used plants to survive and to prosper, and the ways that the reciprocity and the nature of taking them in a way that sustains them is just something that these values that I think we can all appreciate. And as we see things change, and especially after this very like particularly dry summer, it seems like we have to do everything we can to protect these species and this ecosystem that they are a part of. And so this is a special site. I think it has really great information and kids pages and downloadable things, vocabulary, word searches, all that. So I really, the Forest Service website just really wasn't the first one to come to my mind. This is sort of getting right to the source of things. This is a page on the Forest Service site that I'd like to point you to. That's about the anatomy of a tree. I came across this site when I was in the Creative Pulse, and we were tasked with creating a movement-based activity based on science. And we were really free to choose what we wanted to as a subject. But ultimately, we had to create an organized and impactful lesson that was completely movement based, where students are not sitting down, they're getting up, they're making noise, they're moving around quickly in a big space, and also learning about science at the same time. And so this is the site that we used in my group, where we developed a project where students acted out the different roles of various anatomy parts of the tree here. So for instance, the bark was a protective layer, and as we stood in a circle, we pretended to be the bark and we protected the tree. And so we'd yell out bark, 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 and we chopped up in the air. We got to kick up in the air away from our partners, and in a way that protects the tree and doesn't harm the tree. From there, we were the cambium layer, and it was the part that was growing on the tree, and it added rings. And so as we'd say cambium, we would grow, and we'd start out really small, and we'd extend out in thin layers with our arms and standing in place. And it was a hilarious, sort of really fun way to engage with the vocabulary. Again, so the cambium grows, so we were growing outward. So we would use that sort of tone of voice and sort of way of saying it in order to feel the growth and to move at the same time and to say the word at the same time. There's another some other words that are here that we really like to use that aren't actually on this list, called xylem and phloem. And one of them, they each do where they sort of pull nutrients in, or they push nutrients up. And that's a really simple way of putting it. I'm not a scientist. I'm going to say that 100 times. but the interesting part is that's, the basic parts of the roles of those in the tree. And so the students are enacting this too. So they're pulling this up, they're pushing down nutrients. And to sort of culminate the project, everybody is assigned a role. You're either a bark, you're a cambium, you're a xylem, or you're a phloem. And we would essentially make this like living tree sculpture, movement people sculpture in the middle of a big space where the students could move around. And so you would get the phloems in the middle, and they're pulling up nutrients. And I might have these wrong. And the xylem is pulling them down in another ring of kids that are walking in a different direction. And then you have another set of kids going in the other direction that are the cambium layer, and they're just walking, they're growing out. And then the final layer are the ones running around the outside, barking and protecting the tree. And when people stay in their rings and they just operate for a little while, it's a really beautiful thing to witness. We had a lot of fun with that project. And when I've tested and gotten to go do these projects with kids in schools, it's a blast. And we found that kids were able to really recite the words back and retain that information. I remember these words, and I don't maybe not the exact roles of them since I haven't brushed up on this project in a while, but it still is something that I remember these terms, and it's really in particular the way that I would say them and the way that I had to act them out. That is, for me at least, one of the ways that helped me connect. So as you learn about the cedar bark basket and how we use two of these layers, we use the bark layer and the cambium layer, we get to really feel and understand which layers of the tree and which parts are being used. And so from here, again, there is just some great source material to think about how the roles of these things could be a specific movement, and how the way we use our voice, up or down, different tones, to sort of emphasize the role of it is a really fun way to learn. And so I showed you the anatomy of a tree, which talks about sort of the inner layers and how that works, the inner rings and the vocabulary associated with the components that, you know, pull nutrients up, down, or protect the tree as a whole. This page here is a really great follow-up to that, in that it exposes and sort of teaches you about the life of a tree and the cycle of the tree itself, rather than its sort of components. And it's got some great animations and information about trees and the things that we sort of just talked about. So it's just a great way to sort of reinforce all of the different parts. And here again, now you get to see the phloem, which wasn't on the vocabulary list earlier. And it's the pipeline through which food moves from the leaves to the rest of the tree. And so these are, when I read that, I think about those opportunities to say, like, how would my body move? How might I have a lot of fun thinking about something like a pipeline through which food moves from the leaves to the tree, and what kind of like motions I start to think about making. How can you say the word so it kind of like, you know, you're thinking about a pipeline and you're, oh my gosh, it looks really ridiculous in my shed right now, but I'm looking at the flow and how it moves, and that might make me remember that it's like how things flow through the tree and how food moves from the leaves. Maybe that's one gesture to like the tree itself. And I know you can't see my hands, maybe that's a good thing here. Anyways, again, you can reference back to the fact that the cedar bark baskets are made out of this cambium layer. The growing part of the tree produces new bark and new wood each year. The xylem, which I mentioned earlier, this is clarifying a lot of what I had to say, and teaching me as I go through here, and reminding me the water that moves from the roots up to the leaves. I can just imagine a few different motions I might start making that I'll spare you of, and maybe you'll think of some too. But what would that opportunity like for all students? I'd make some adults get up and do this too, just to think about this word xylem and how its function as moving water from the roots to the leaves. Anyways, you can scroll through these, and it's again a great resource, a great follow-up. Maybe introducing it in the way that, you know, we maybe I guess I feel like I was more used to it as a kid, where I just see a list of words, to something like this that's much more animated and a little more engaging, but to make them also just get up and to move throughout this, you know, just a great resource. Again, this is the Arbor Day Foundation. Here's a site about just the ways that trees help fight global climate change. We're so lucky to live here. I lived in the desert for a long time, and I really missed the trees. To go from, you know, no forest to something where the trees are massive, and almost, when you're in the cedar trees where they block out the sky, it's something that we are so lucky to have and to cherish. And I think everybody can agree on that. And so again, this just has great information on why we can benefit from planting trees, and how our like initiatives for replanting our national forests, so on and so forth. Great way to introduce sort of the material, or at least to inform ourselves about ways we can think about it. To come back to sort of cultural uses of cedar bark, this is from the Invasive Species Council of BC, and it gives a great overview of just coastal Salish vocabulary about this, a different impacts of invasive species that are threatening this incredibly important tree. And one of my favorite things I came across in this was the diagram that it provided with all the different things that are derived from the cedar tree by coastal Salish tribes, and especially in particularly the people of Cascadia. Again, all of this is sort of derived from cedar trees, and the art and culture and lodging and transportation. It's like I just like imagine that world, and it's a great way to sort of bring up like how do we live now, and what's the material that we use the most now, and what's the difference, and what's that look like, and where did it come from? And if I feel like we'd probably say plastic, right? That plastic is just everything. And the switch, is not that long ago. 1878 really is not a terribly long time ago. And so to be able to connect those things and put them into perspective, and to again imagine a world made of cedar trees, I think is just again inspiration I find from coming through and looking at different resources. So here we have a great quick site about a field guide to trees by the National Geographic Kids. It's got a great list here of just sort of things to watch out for, do's and don'ts of when you're going out into the forest, or if you're collecting or looking for or identifying trees. But really, it's just to refresh yourself too on some of the basics of what to look for. And again, as an artist, when I hear like we have to look and identify shapes and describe shapes, round, pointy, conical, it's a great art lesson in itself. But to be able to tie that to like identifying a species, especially when you have to look for other things too, flowers, cones, fruits, acorn, pine cones and berries, the textures of the bark. There's so much to look at. It's like looking at a painting. It's like looking at a microscope and seeing all the different variety right before your eyes. It's powerful to be able to organize your thoughts a little bit when you're describing how to identify. And we don't have to be experts in that, I think, but it's like if you can wrap your head around a few of the terms themselves, then it can be really useful, and it can be so inspiring. And I think these are the ones too that how would you as a teacher take these terms and maybe inspired by the last project that I just described about the anatomy of a tree and how kids play the game, how might you turn something like this, like identifying certain habitat, bark, fruit, flowers, cones, or the shapes of the trees themselves into like a game or something that's engaging, maybe movement based. Perhaps even if you're lucky enough to have a lot of trees on your campus, what can you do to take them out there and to show like this is right here for you to all see, and and to use your identification skills to figure it out. What are all the things that you can notice? And I look at trees just the same way. It really is again like looking deeply into a painting that has lots of different details. It's really impossible to sort of take it in all at once, and it's different from 50 feet back to right up against the trunk, looking at the small bugs crawling through the texture of the bark. So it's to me that represents opportunity for education. and it makes me wonder just how would I turn something like this into a game. I guess you'll have to tune into the next PIR day. And so here we can see an example of a historical plateau cedar bark basket that uses the bark and the cambium layer. And here in this picture we can just catch a glimpse, if you can see my cursor here along the edge, you can see this cambium layer right on here on the inner part of this fold. And then just on the outside of that layer is the bark. It may be a little, let me see if I can zoom in here. Here is this cambium layer, and you can see it's separate from the bark. And then there's the bark layer that's been peeled down. And I can tell that they used a a scraper here. These are like scraping marks that make their way down the basket. Great just page from our National Historic Park Park Service website that lets us see some of this form up close and in detail. And one of my favorite things to talk about while I'm working with cedar bark is to ask students to think of the colors. Think about in your mind what color think about in your mind what color bark is. And I think sometimes, a lot of the times, we'll say brown, bark is brown. But it's really not. When you get up close to it and you look at the various layers, you find things like grays and greens and purples, coppers, really incredible colors that my favorite description of it that I've heard is that as a color show. One student said, "This is a color show." And I just said that was the most amazing term to use for this, because it truly was. As you peeled it, it was like a slow moving firework in front of you, just lots of colors revealing themselves. And that's this like so important about really putting those materials in our hands. We're really trying to take an up close look and asking ourselves questions that are based on what are the kids seeing, what are they observing, and being able to sort of slide that information in when it's sort of most relevant and can really stick in their mind. They'll say, "Oh, right, bark isn't just brown. It's multiple layers of colors." I'm sure that the kids will repeat that verbatim. So I'd like to introduce you to this site here. This is the Artmobile of Montana, and in particular, looking at Corky Claremont, who had work on the Artmobile of Montana that traveled throughout the state. Corky Claremont is somebody who I really look up to as an artist and a friend and a mentor, and as somebody who is like a loud voice for the tribe and does it through visual arts. Somebody who is just a great teacher and has given so much to the community in the ways of art and places that are impactful and teach others about CSKT history and people. I think of things like our fine arts building at Salish College that had some incredible floor mosaics, the program that was there, the building itself, and the Veterans Memorial that's across the street, the numerous students that he inspired, and their sculptures are on campus at SKC and throughout really the country and the world. And just somebody who we're so lucky to be able to witness his work and to be so close to it, and to have him be from our community. It's just a great person who I look up to. So Corky, he is really one of he's inspired me greatly. He hired me to SKC and it really sort of put me on this path that I am. I really thank and look up to him all the time for that. But again, he inspires me here, where he created a cedar bark basket made out of glass, and really an appreciation of the form and the texture and the colors, and to make statements about how, we are here now, and there are still stories, and there are still, we can appreciate the beauty that is of the past, and we can make things with what we know now, and how do those things help us perpetuate culture. And so this video here, you can watch that. I'll just sort of play it through on. Oh, I guess there we go. I'll just play it through and talk a little bit about it while you can watch it on your own. I'll skip through, but I think this is great. I think every student in Ronan, Montana, especially, should see this video, and every student on our reservation should see this video. A way for them to get to know one of our most prolific and important artists, CSKT artists, Indigenous artists in general, and the way that he uses contemporary art to teach us about issues and about a culture. And so in this video, it gives you a really great example of his printmaking, but you'll get to introduce the students to glass blowing. And here I think about physics, and I think about heat, and I'm a ceramic artist, so I'm really interested in heat and the way things change and molecules break down under heat and fuse. And so here he's holding up an actual cedar bark basket, the one that was used as an inspiration. It's a really nice basket. You can see here, compared to the one we just looked at, it's got much less peeled off of the outside, and it's just got a great form. It's got a different form than the one we saw in the last video, or sorry, in the last tab. And so they go through the process, and you get to witness sort of this collaborative process that glass blowers do. There's a show on Netflix called Blown Away, and I found that in a lot of my tours at the museums, a lot of students have seen that and really enjoyed really talking about the glass blowing process to the other students. So there's a lot of ways to bring up again, connecting science and physics and art together in a way that is cultural. This project's really what inspired me to think like I should make some cedar bark baskets out of clay. So like I mentioned before, the Montana Arts Council grant that we received allowed us to really go out and document a lot of the things that we had been doing already in culture. And you can see here some really beautiful pictures of Aspen digging bitterroot, and us out and gathering cedar, and footage from other events that we participated in. And we are always trying to think creatively about how we can use the knowledge that we have to create meaningful curriculum content for teachers on our reservation, and in the state of Montana, and maybe in the entire world, who knows. But our business name, our consulting business that we've built here, and again, the funding from this grant allowed us to get some of the cameras and equipment that we needed, some of the subscriptions, and the ability to build this sort of website, and as well as like the cost for a lot of materials. This is where we plan to use and link to different resources for anybody to access. And our title of our company is called ástqʷ, which means alive and well in Salish. I have this here in our mission statement. And our mission is for our reservation tribes and communities to be ástqʷ, alive and well, through access to authentic Indigenous educational experiences. We are guided by our passion for perpetuating Salish language and cultural values to provide consultation, instruction, and to support community stakeholders. From the 1860s to 1960s and beyond, in the United States, Native American children were forcibly removed from their families and tribes in the name of education. Before colonization and boarding schools, our Native children were taught their identity by intergenerational knowledge transfer, by thinking, doing, making, noticing, and expressing. All of these ways of learning identity were purposefully and methodically oppressed in U.S. boarding schools. We hope to be a part of healing this historical trauma and use high-impact teaching practices to bring Indigenous values, worldview, and ways of knowing to education, and especially to those that serve our tribal students. And so we're really proud of this mission, and it's work that we have been doing for a long time, sort of separately, and now we're working on bringing this into sort of a cohesive set of contents, trainings, and honestly, to be that resource that, or be a resource that people can reach out to. The inspiration for creating our business is to allow us to collaborate with many schools and institutions and cast a wide net across our region to help educate about Salish people, culture, and language. There is a need for Native American representation in schools and other public institutions. There is a need for Native American representation in schools and other public institutions. Tribal knowledge and contribution should be celebrated as often as any other subject in school or recognized in public institutions to truly understand the history of this nation and state. Access to learning about Native American history and contributions are always at stake. Montana has failed in its efforts to meet Indian education for all standards written into its own constitution, and our business fights this racial injustice by providing support to teachers and institutions to deliver appropriate, meaningful, creative, collaborative, authentic, and engaging educational experiences. And so we have a contact down here on our website, and you're free to contact us there if you have any questions, especially after this presentation. We are still working on building this. Like I said, this is work in progress. It's taken an immense sort of effort throughout this summer and throughout our our lives, putting together this idea and what is that? What is it? What does it look like? How do we serve? Lemlemch, thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to contact me at gmail.com if you have any questions. Nemeth Wichtemannsen.